When you see the price of rent, food, and utilities versus the income most people bring in each week, it's actually not hard to see how some people end up homeless or even prefer it.
There were some major differences between reality and the film.
Everything just costs so much, but the streets are free. So sometimes homeless people might even end up wealthier than you. From a man with a forgotten bank account to a homeless billionaire, here are 20 fakest homeless people who are actually rich. Number 20. John Helsinki. John Helsinki had no idea that he was a fake homeless person. He was, in fact, homeless for 3 years in Tampa, Florida, living in a cardboard box. Little did he know, he actually had more than enough to be living a comfortable lifestyle in a home. John said that while he was homeless, he had become invisible to passersby, but police and social security workers had attempted to find him temporary accommodation. To do so, they started tracing his birth certificate, and that's when a housing official came across a bank account that John forgot he had.
Having a cardboard box and sleeping by the bus stop.
John had set up an account with Landmark Bank, which is now Bank of America. In the years since it was set up, John's social security benefits had been stacking up without him even knowing he had them available to him. By the time he found out about the account, he had enough to put a deposit on a house. John was thrilled with the news, and the police officer who helped him track down his identification was absolutely stunned. At that point, it was likely that John was more affluent than many people who even had somewhere to live.
Before we go on, like this video, smash the subscribe button and click the notification bell right now, or this centipede will crawl on your face when you're sleeping.
Number 19. Richard Leroy Walters. Some people just don't want a secure lifestyle in a comfortable home. It sounds absurd, but Richard Leroy Walters is proof that money doesn't buy happiness, nor is it the end-all be-all of living a fulfilling life. Richard was a jet propulsion engineer from Huntington, Indiana, who served in the Marines during the Korean War. He died homeless in Phoenix, Arizona, and left an incredible amount of money to the tune of $4 million to charities like the Mission of Mercy and National Public Radio. Richard was well educated, having earned a bachelor's degree with honors in mechanical engineering and a master's degree in teaching. He never married, nor did he have any children, and he was estranged from his 2 brothers. When Richard was forced into early retirement after 2 decades with Allied Signal Aerospace, he started living on the streets for reasons unknown. He didn't have great social skills, didn't own a car, and was a reserved man. While homeless, he always appeared clean and tidy and was known to get around town with a small backpack while wearing a baseball cap. A volunteer nurse at the Mission of Mercy, Rita Bell, befriended Richard and assisted him in finding temporary housing. Although he didn't stay there long and would often venture into the mission to make investments over the phone. He also completed all his own tax forms. It wasn't until his death after health problems that his wealth became known. Rita was the executor of his estate and a beneficiary, and many charities received around $400,000 each. Number 18. Lou Denard. Lou Denard is richer than most people that pass him on the streets he lives on. He has a trust fund that was once worth almost $700,000, and he draws $2,500 a month from it, along with $500 in Social Security. And yet, Lou doesn't want to live inside and make a comfortable life for himself. He'd rather be on the streets. Lou came into money when his mother died. Her assets were sold to form a trust, and he's been using that money since 1992. At that time, Lou abandoned his carpentry career and headed to the streets, likely due to the bottle having him firmly in its grasp. He has spent a lot of time in alcohol rehabilitation programs, but hasn't had much luck. He has also had plenty of opportunities to stay in rooms and apartments, but never found they were to his liking. When Lou is sober, he's a polite man who sips coffee, smokes cigarettes, reads poetry, and writes in a notebook in North Beach cafes. But he's not the same when he's drunk. Over the years, medical bills, mainly relating to his lifestyle, have diminished his massive bank account, but he still has a fair amount left that could easily buy him a house or at least a deposit on one. It's unlikely that Lou will ever change his lifestyle, even when he is in an excellent position to do so. Number 17. Nicholas Bergruin. Imagine having £1 billion to play with, but not wanting to actually buy anything for yourself. Nicholas Bergeron has a personal fortune of about £1.5 billion. But by 2012, he didn't own a house, a car, or even a watch. Instead, he carried his possessions inside a paper bag and wouldn't buy any new clothes until he had worn them out. Nicholas started with a £150,000 loan from his art dealer father and slowly turned it into a mega fortune through sound business decisions. You might think he'd just buy a comfortable home and do his business dealings from there, but it's not the life he prefers.
How are we reshaping what it means to be a human?
Instead, Nicholas would travel around different cities by private jet and stay in some of the most luxurious hotels. He said he always spends a lot of time in hotels and that it's easier. He also said he feels happier. And that's the real kicker here, isn't it? If material possessions don't make you happy, then why should you buy them just because you have money? Nicholas said he isn't attached to material things and doesn't need much, so he spends his wealth on other stuff like expensive art that he then gifts to museums. While it's not known if he purchased it for himself or not, Nicholas did spend $63.1 million on an estate in Beverly Hills in 2021, so I guess he's not of no fixed abode any longer. Number 16. Chris Gardner. The Pursuit of Happiness, starring Will Smith, is a movie many people love. It's about a man battling homelessness with his young child while working hard to become a stockbroker. The film made you laugh, made you cry, it did all those things, but it was just a movie, right? Well, actually, it was based on the real life of Christopher Paul Gardner, a motivational speaker and American businessman.
There were some major differences between reality and the film.
Chris worked hard to raise his toddler son while battling homelessness in the 1980s. He ended up becoming a stockbroker and later founded a brokerage firm. In 2006, Chris sold his stake in the firm and published a memoir, which was then turned into that movie many of us know and love. But even though Chris's story has a wonderful outcome, it wasn't all smooth sailing, especially before his entire life changed for the better. While working hard as a trainee stockbroker, Chris's partner disappeared with their son, and Chris was working long hours while living in a flophouse. His now ex-partner returned with their son, and Chris took sole custody, which meant he would have to leave the flophouse that didn't allow children. While saving money for a rental house, Chris spent nearly a year secretly homeless with his son, scrambling to place him in daycare facilities and staying in airports, parks, and even a locked bathroom in a BART station as safe places to spend the night. No one ever knew what was going on in Chris's life. Number 15. Max Melitzer. Max Melitzer was a homeless man in his 60s in Salt Lake City who would push around a shopping cart filled with his personal possessions. Everything he owned was in that cart, and he was living on the streets while sometimes sheltering in abandoned storage sheds. According to some reports, Max suffered from some emotional issues, but his reasons for homelessness aren't known. However, his housing situation all changed when his brother died of cancer. A private investigator tracked Max down to inform him that he had inherited a significant amount of money in his will. That money would allow him to provide for himself, live in a house, and purchase food, clothing, health care, and whatever else he needed to get his life back on track. The private investigator searched for Max for 2 months until he was eventually tracked down, and family members planned to meet with him. He broke the news to Max about his brother while sitting on a park bench, but didn't tell Max how much he was inheriting. According to the private investigator, Max was a sweet, articulate man who was shocked and excited about the news. Number 14. Nick Makuta. Rags to riches stories aren't really all that common these days, but they do still happen, and you don't even need to win the lottery. Nick Makuta grew up in Romania and moved to the United States to make a better life for himself. His grandmother gifted him $500 to help him on his way, and he used $100 of that just to get to the city where he planned to change his life. Things weren't off to a great start. Nick couldn't find anywhere to live and had to sleep on park benches. He also struggled to eat, so he would buy cheap burgers at McDonald's to save money. Fortunately, Nick managed to secure low-paying work that enabled him to save up for an apartment deposit, and he gained his real estate broker license. But it wasn't real estate that turned him from rags to riches. Nick decided to import items to sell on eBay, and he began earning up to $4,000 per month. He quit his job as a real estate broker and moved into the e-commerce business. Now, he has over $40 million in revenue, owns several online stores, and has over 100 flats in the US and Romania, along with 4 luxury cars. He has even purchased properties for his family members. Even though Nick has worked hard for everything he has, he still thanks his late grandmother for that $500 that helped him chase his dreams. Number 13. Harry Sanders. At Harry Sanders' lowest point, he was visiting eateries asking for food that they weren't able to sell that day. He was sleeping under bridges, dining in soup kitchens, and trying not to encroach on other homeless people's territories. Harry had become homeless at age 17 and said it was one of the scariest periods of his life. But today, you'd never know that was his story. The young Melbourne man was worth $1.5 million by age 21, and he was the CEO of his own business, Studio Hawk. Before Harry became homeless, he was interested in SEO technology that would help businesses become more visible in Google search results. He launched Studio Hawk at age 16, but ran out of cash to keep the venture going. However, he never lost his skills, so when he became homeless, Harry used homeless shelter phones to reach out to past clients and try to secure work. Soon enough, clients were raving about his skills, and he acquired enough work to earn a steady income and move into a share house. Within 3 years, his company had become a success, reached a worth of $1.5 million, and even opened an office in London. Harry said his homelessness taught him resilience and matured him. He believed he wouldn't have been the same person he is now and wouldn't have been pushed to succeed if it wasn't for that dark time in his life. Number 12. Simon Wright. Many people beg on the streets out of desperation. They're homeless, hungry, and want enough to be able to stay in a motel for the night to get out of the elements. But Simon Wright from the UK is a different story. He appears to be a bit of a professional beggar and has made up to £50,000 a year being on the streets of Putney. Meanwhile, he's living a comfortable lifestyle in an expensive housing association-owned flat across Putney Bridge in Fulham High Street. Fortunately, the jig was up back in 2013. Simon was arrested and sentenced to 2 months in jail after being caught breaching his anti-social behavior order after he had been seen begging in other locations. Simon had been earning about £200 a day sitting near a cash point machine with his dog, asking for money from passers-by and even bank customers. His anti-social behavior order prevented him from being able to beg anywhere in London. It's unknown whether he returned to his begging lifestyle after being released from jail, but there's no denying it was a lucrative venture for him. Appearing to be homeless made him richer than many people who had comfortable homes. Number 11. Isha. Isha looked like a sad, elderly, poor woman. She spent 50 years panhandling on the streets of Jeddah, and no one would have ever guessed she was actually incredibly rich with a wealth of about $800,000. The blind, haggard, 100-year-old woman grew up as a beggar with her mother and sister and was the only one left out of the three. She would get a lot of sympathy, and people would donate to her because she was a blind old woman without a family. But one thing she wasn't: poor. When she died at age 100 in her home, she left behind a massive fortune, including 4 buildings, jewels, and gold coins. She was by no means in a position to need to beg. One person knew how rich she was, and that was her friend Ahmed al-Saidi, who had grown up with Isha. Ahmed told Isha several times to stop begging, but she had always refused and said she was preparing for hard times. Although she did leave her gold coins in Ahmed's care, and he reported their existence to police upon Isha's passing. Isha did many good things in her life. She let people live in the buildings she owned for free, knowing they were poor people. Number 10. Sambhaji Kale. Most families work for a living, but Sambhaji Kale and his family do something completely different. They beg. Sambhaji Kale is one of the richest beggars in Mumbai, with his family easily earning up to 1,000 rupees per day begging, which is about $13. Even if they don't earn that much a day, they have plenty of assets and wealth to fall back on. The family of 4 always has at least 40,000 rupees or $530 in their bank account and owns a flat, 2 houses, and a plot of land. A few thousand rupees is also sitting in investment companies. Living costs are reasonably cheap in India, so the Kale family make more than enough to support themselves. Most beggars in India make a daily income of at least 80 rupees and can even earn more than daily wage earners. Even more surprising is the fact that most beggars in Kolkata have an average bank account balance of 25,000 rupees or $334, which is more than enough to support them for a time. Non-disabled beggars also outnumber disabled beggars. Number 9. Gary Thompson. The sad reality is that many people end up homeless and begging when they've experienced hardship in their life. Some people have a mental or physical illness, and others might have a disability that prevents them from living a normal life. You genuinely feel sorry for such people, so you might be inclined to give them $1 or 2 as you go about your day. Gary Thompson may have realized this because the perfectly able man can make up to $100,000 a year by faking a stutter and disability while begging in a wheelchair that he doesn't need. In 2016, Gary pleaded guilty to failing to report income and misrepresentation charges. He had earned as much as $100,000 a year alongside over $80,000 in Medicaid benefits. At the time, Gary was already serving a 14-month sentence for passing a bad check and another 7 months for assaulting a corrections employee. After getting out of jail, he said he was done with panhandling, but he had been seen back at it again by a reporter with a hidden camera. There is some truth to his mobility problems, as he did receive a settlement from Honda for a car accident, but the majority of his begging tactics are just an act. Number 8. Erwin Corey. Erwin Corey was a well-known stand-up comic, activist, and film director. But if he's familiar for reasons other than those, you may have purchased a paper from him during his days panhandling for change on the streets of Manhattan. Interestingly, Erwin didn't need the money, nor was he homeless. He lived in a beautiful house worth about $3.5 million and was likely very comfortable. Yet he still spent most of his days hanging around the Queens Midtown Tunnel asking for money from motorists. They would never have questioned what that money was for, nor would they probably have cared. But every few months, he would donate that money to a charity that would purchase medical supplies for children in Cuba. According to some reports, Erwin's decision to look, dress, and act homeless was twofold. Not only did it allow him to donate to charity, sometimes up to $250 a day, but it also gave him something to do. His wife, Fran, of 70 years, had passed away, and it helped him beat the loneliness. Before his death in 2013 at age 102, Erwin had spent every day for 17 years panhandling, and that was on the back of a successful career in Broadway, theater, comedy clubs, and TV. Number 7. Lakshmi Das. Lakshmi Das was 60 years old when she finally decided to deposit 44 years of earnings into a bank account. She had been begging on the streets of North Calcutta for several decades, starting when she was just 16 years old. Over that time, she had amassed what is thought to be about 30,000 rupees, or almost $700, and had spent frugally in an attempt to save as much as possible for her retirement. According to her sister, Asha, she would spend the bare minimum from her daily collection and store the rest in iron buckets covered up with jute bags in her home located in a shanty town. Lakshmi had told officials that she had kept the coins for when she was too old to beg and needed a pension plan. However, police feared that she would have the cash stolen from her home, so they urged her to deposit it into a bank. Officials spent many hours counting the coins and didn't immediately have any idea of how much she had. Lakshmi didn't even have a bank account, so her first step was to open one. Once the money was counted and deposited into her account, the bank would advise her on what to do with it. Number 6. Sarvatya Devi. Sarvatya Devi looks like a poorly old woman who can't take care of herself, but as it turns out, she does pretty well for herself as a beggar. She is one of the most prominent and richest beggars in her area and makes a pretty reasonable income. Sarvatya owns a house near the Ashok Cinemas in Patna, an ancient city along the south bank of the Ganges River in Bihar in northeast India. Most days, she makes her way to where the trains are in Patna and earns up to 40,000 rupees or $530 each month just by begging. Although Sarvatya isn't stupid. She knows she can't beg forever, especially if her health takes a turn. So she puts 36,000 rupees or $480 towards insurance premiums each year out of her earnings. This may allow her to live a reasonably comfortable lifestyle if she's no longer able to beg. Sarvatya is definitely not the only person supporting themselves through begging. There are an estimated 500,000 beggars in India, which is crazy when you think that begging is a crime in most Indian states. However, not everyone begs for the same reason. Some people do it to support themselves, while others have mastered the art to earn significant sums of money. Number 5. Bharat Jain. Bharat Jain is a wealthy man. He owns 2 apartments worth over $100,000 and a shop that collects 10,000 rupees per month. His family also runs a business. So out of most everyday people living in India, Bharat is certainly up there in terms of doing well for himself. But do you know how he makes the majority of his money? By begging. He's not homeless, but people may think he is when they part with their hard-earned cash after seeing him beg for it on the streets. Bharat can earn as much as 2,500 rupees in just 8 or 10 hours of begging. He makes about 75,000 rupees or $1,000 a month, and that's even more than the average salary for India's chief minister. Where are we going wrong? This guy's got it sorted. His family, who runs a business selling study materials and notebooks, have asked him to give up his begging career, but he just won't do it. Instead, he picks a begging spot, rakes in the cash, and then goes home to his 2 flats where he lives with his father, wife, brother, and 2 sons. It's easy to assume that the person you give spare change to just needs a helping hand in life, but you may also now think that they could be richer than you, just like Bharat Jain. Number 4. Burju Chandra Azad. In 2019, a beggar in his 60s was hit by a speeding train in Mumbai near the Gobandi railway station after trying to cross the train tracks. He was later identified as Burju Chandra Azad, and he lived near a shanty. Given where he was found and the fact that he was a beggar, the police probably thought the man had no money or possessions. However, when they carried his dead body back to his home, they discovered that the man wasn't as poor as he seemed. In fact, he was rich. They found lakhs of rupees at his home, and it took the police team around 8 hours to count all the coins. These coins amounted to rupees 1.77 lakh, which is nearly $2,400, more than enough for the average person to live on in India. According to the senior police inspector, the man lived alone and the neighbors knew very little about him. However, they took note of documents in his home that led them to his family, who lives in Rajasthan. They contacted his son, who would likely inherit the man's wealth. Whether or not they knew about it remains to be seen. Number 3. Chotu Barik. Chotu Barik is one of many thousands of people in India living with physical deformities who beg for money on the streets. Chotu was born with deformities from the waist down and started begging from a young age to earn money for his low-income family. Back then, he could earn up to 18,000 rupees per year, but he's now in his 40s, earning 4 lakhs per year, or about $5,300. Most days, you'll find Chotu at the Chakradhapur railway station in Jharkhand, which is where he'll spend time begging to earn 30,000 rupees per month. When he's not begging, you'll find him working in the utensil shop he owns in Bandi village in the Simdeg district, or working in a marketing firm for personal care and health products. Chotu is never without something to do. Chotu also has 3 wives and provides them each with a fixed income. His wives even help him run his shop so that he can split the time between all of his ventures. It's clear to see Chotu has come a long way from his childhood, even if he hasn't given up his begging ways. Number 2. Papu Kumar. Papu Kumar is a crorepati, which means he has assets worth more than 1 crore or 10 million rupees. I've done the math for you. That's about $133,000 US. He has savings accounts in 4 nationalized banks, property worth over $100,000, and lends his money to traders. You might assume that Papu is a rich, powerful man and maybe a banker or a politician, but in reality, he's a beggar. Papu is a physically challenged man in his early 30s who has a poorly arm and leg from fractures in an accident years earlier. He spends much of his time begging on the Patna railway station platform, even though he's continually shooed away by personnel. His financial wealth only became well known when the Railway Protection Force took him into custody during a special drive to remove beggars from the streets. When police personnel found his 4 ATM cards in 4 different banks, they were shocked. Then they discovered the cash balances of his saving account and information about the loans he had made to small traders. With this information, an RPF official suggested that he get treatment for his leg and hand. That would make sense, right? But Papu said that if he did that, how would he continue begging? RPF Inspector Rajesh Lal said they've removed him from the station premises many times and asked him to stop begging since he has sufficient cash to eke out a living. Why he wants to continue begging is beyond someone's imagination, he said. Number 1. Maulana Khan. Maulana Khan, known to his acquaintances as Masu, is probably worth around $4 million, and that's a conservative estimate. He owns 2 properties, one of which he rents out for a considerable sum, and he also has a couple of bank accounts. It's easy to assume he's a wealthy professional like a doctor, lawyer, politician, or accountant, but Maulana Khan is a beggar, and a very good one at that. From 8 p.m. until the wee hours of the morning, he sits outside the Lokhandwala complex in India, home to high-end bars and restaurants, and begs for money. He wears filthy clothing and looks a little bit emaciated. Each night, he'll head home with about 1,500 rupees or $20. The married man in his 60s will dress in spotless white clothing and take an auto rickshaw to the Lokhandwala complex each evening, stopping before reaching his destination to change into his work clothes. Once he's finished for the evening, he'll stop close to home to change back into his immaculate clothing before returning home. Maulana said that for him, begging is a full-time career option like any other job. Having somewhere to live doesn't necessarily make you wealthy, and you've probably learned that now. You can be without a fixed abode and still be better off in some way. Would you prefer to be rich and homeless, or poor and with a home? I'm curious as to which scenario you'd choose. Also, check out our other cool stuff showing up on screen right now. See you next time!